Episode number 74. Several months ago, Kenyon Zitzka from the Zero Excuses podcast invited me on his show to discuss things about fatherhood. And I thought this was an excellent conversation, and I was honored to be on his show. So I wanted to share it with you all this week. And make sure you check out the show notes after the episode to connect more with Kenyon and all that he's doing with Zero Excuses. Now, guys, I wanted to quickly remind you of two more things before we get started. Number one, enrollment for the Ironman Mastermind is open. If you missed last week's podcast, make sure you check that out as well, as we take you behind the scenes of an Ironman meeting and you get to see what it's all about. Secondly, Dad Hackers is now on Patreon, and this is yet another way for you to get more involved with the Dad Hackers community. You can check out the Ironman as well as Patreon by hopping on over to the show notes after the show. All right, fellas, enjoy the show today. What's up, Dad Hackers? My name is Patrick Antonucci, and I am the host and founder of this podcast and community of Dad Hackers. Dad Hackers is a community of Christian fathers who are devoted to encouraging, equipping, and enabling one another to become the men that God has created and called us to be, so that we can raise up the next generation of fully devoted followers of Christ and leave a legacy of multi-generational faithfulness. Now, on this show, we primarily interview Christian men to dive deep into their experiences and insights into what it means to be a Christian man, a Christian husband, a Christian father, and a Christian leader. We ask questions that dig deep into the thinking and rationale and experiences of these men so that we can all learn and grow into the men that God is calling us to be. I'm so thankful that you've joined us today. Make sure you subscribe so that you never miss any of our value-packed episodes. Also, please make sure you leave an honest review if you're listening to this in iTunes or any other platform that takes reviews. Reviews boost the show's ratings, which means that more dads are going to come across our show and benefit from the content that we put out. I also wanted to let you know that we do have a free private Facebook group just for Christian dads. So after the show, make sure you hop on over to the show notes. There's a link for that in there as well.
Patrick Antonucci, thank you for taking time out of your weekend here to join us on the Zero Excuses podcast. Really excited to have you on. Really love your purpose with your Dad Hackers movement, where you are helping men become more present and live a more fulfilled life, and be there for their families. Like I said, I'm really excited to have you on. Why don't you give yourself a quick introduction and let us know a little bit about you?
Sure thing, man. Kenyon, I really appreciate you inviting me to come on the show today. It's a blessing and an honor to be able to speak with you and to have your audience's ear for a minute. And it's my hope and my prayer that the things that we talk about today are a blessing to them in a multifaceted way, and that we could just bring a lot of value to the people that are listening. Like you said, my name's Patrick Antonucci. I am a Christian, a husband, a father, and that order is intentional, and that's my resume, so to speak.
Yeah.
I have been married for going on 15 years this coming May. I have 5 children, 3 girls, 2 boys. My oldest son is 12. He's almost a teenager. He reminds me of that regularly on the daily. Not that he's excited to be a teenager or anything. Just kidding. But and my youngest is 3.5. She'll be 4 in June, and she is a fireball. So yeah, you mentioned about Dad Hackers. That is it started with me wanting to surround myself with other Christian men who desired to become the men that God has created and designed us to be, particularly guys that did not grow up in a Christian home. I didn't. I kind of come from a little bit of a broken home. My parents were divorced when I was 5, and didn't really grow up in a Christian home. My mom was spiritual minded, nominally Catholic as we grew up. We were like the typical creaster, as you would call them, people that went to mass like on Christmas and Easter. And I don't know how much of my backstory you want me to fill in right now, but I can just go on it if you want.
Yeah, no, this is good stuff, and there's a lot of our upbringing that we carry forward and we use for both positive and sometimes there's some things that hold us back, but
Yeah.
this has given us a good glimpse into your you know your thought processes and stuff, and I definitely want to dig into that here. I'm big into mindset and
Right.
love hearing about how people, what makes people tick here.
Yeah. What makes you tick? Yeah, definitely. So that's kind of where I'm going with all this. I start there. I go all the way back to when I was about 5, when my parents were divorced, because um, that's that's really where the home became broken. And like I was saying, I didn't really grow up in a Christian home, nominally Catholic. Um, and then around the time I was 12 or 13, my mom started to attend a church, Christian church, and she became a Christian, committed her life to Christ. And I soon followed after that. My dad never, to this day, never really caught on to that. And it breaks my heart. And I try to um, talk with him regularly about it as much as we can, but he's still resistant to it. Um, anyway, the reason I go into all of that is that because I did not grow up in a Christian home. Now, having been a Christian and being a Christian, and now having a wife and children of my own, I'm realizing I don't have that family of origin experience to draw on, of what it's like to grow up in a Christian home, what it's like to have a Christian father, what it's like to have a Christian mother, a Christian marriage, to be brought up in a Christian home, to be brought up in. And that's really strongly what I desire for my marriage, and for my children, and for my family, and for my home. And so I started Dad Hackers at the end of 2017, and I just started with a Facebook group. um, I realized that you could quickly and quite easily create a community online with like-minded individuals. So I just started inviting some of my friends to the Facebook group, um, in the hope that we could encourage, support, equip one another to become the dads that we wish we had, to become the men that God has called and created us to be. And then I wanted to do more. And so I started researching different avenues with technology, like social media, YouTube, Facebook, um, podcasting, blogging, those types of different things. And all my research kind of led me to podcasting. And podcasting, you really get to be in someone's ear for a long time.
Yeah.
And in general, people tend to listen to a whole podcast. They might watch 10 seconds of your Facebook Live, or a minute or two, but they're not going to watch a 35, 45-minute Facebook Live. Not most people. Most people aren't going to watch a 45-minute long YouTube video, but people will listen to a 3-hour long, um, you know, podcast episode, where you have those long form podcasts.
Yeah.
And that's by no means how far I go on my podcast. But anyway, that's what led me to podcasting, because I wanted to do some more. And I wanted to interview two types of men primarily. Men who have done the things that I'm trying to do in my family. In other words, they've created a Christian home in their family and raised their children to be faithful. In other words, like, their boys became faithful men, their daughters became faithful women, and are now having faithful marriages. They're like carrying that torch to the next generation. So that's one type of man that I like to interview. And then the other type is um, guys who have expertise in a certain area. So just recently, I interviewed a guy who his expertise is in finances. A lot of guys struggle with finances, and he comes at it from a biblical Christian's perspective. And I had a guy talking about firearm safety. I had a guy talking about um, like situational awareness, this personal safety, safety mindset, those types of things, and a whole bunch of different stuff. But those are two of the primary areas that I try to interview guys with, because those are the types of things that I need to know to become more of the man that God's created me to be. I want to hear how, particularly the guys that have raised faithful families, I want to know the things they did, but even more than that, get behind that to the thinking that led them to do those things that they're doing. Kind of like you do. You want to dig deep into the mindset
Yeah.
behind the man, not just the action steps that they take, but what's their thought process behind that, that led them to do those things. So um, that's kind of in a nutshell what we do. So I started the podcast in June of 2018, and then in September we launched a Iron Men of Dad Hackers mastermind group, and we meet weekly virtually. That's like kind of our paid membership piece, and that's where we really go deep with each other. We keep each other accountable. We have a tracker tool that helps us stay on track with certain areas of our lives, and that's been very beneficial to myself and to the other men in the group. Um, and so ultimately, my vision is, selfishly, to become more of the man that I know that I have the potential to be, and I'm not realizing that potential. And then B, to bring as many other guys along with me on that journey.
Awesome. So I do want to dig into that vision piece, and you've mentioned it a couple times here. Let's dig into what your vision of yourself is. What is the kind of man that you're destined to be? I know I'm butchering that a little bit.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about. Well, in a very big umbrella type of sense, it's for me, it's a man who serves God, obeys God, and carries out God's will for his life. For me, in particular, like getting down more to the granular side of it, it's being a servant of God in every area of my life, in fully submitting to Him, with my thoughts and my words and my actions and my deeds. And let me just disclaimer here: I am nowhere near where I want to be, or where I will eventually be. And this is an ideal status that I know I will never ever be able to fully 100% reach, but it's something to continuously strive for as I move through life. So that's like so I give you the big umbrella picture, then a little bit more detail on me in particular. That's kind of my relationship with God, just to be humbly serving Him. And then the next level would be as a husband, serving my wife, and being the man that she needs me to be. Because I think one of the things that you'll find is, if you have a well-functioning marriage where the man is fulfilling his duties, roles, and responsibilities, and is being the leader in every facet of the way that you can think of leader in his home, but particularly in his marriage. And, a lot of guys can run with that and think that that means that you call all the shots and you say jump and she says how high. And that's not at all what I'm talking about. I'm talking about servant leadership. If a man, I feel like if a man is doing that, then his wife is going to bloom and flourish and blossom and thrive and be vibrant if he's doing that. Now she may have some baggage, if you will, or her own personal things that are kind of preventing her from doing that. But if he's really fulfilling his role and his duty and his responsibility, he's going to at least be setting her up to become the woman that she was designed to be as well. And so that's kind of where I want to go as a husband. And that's kind of as in the husband area. And then as a father, a similar thing. I want to be the man who's present and fully engaged with his children. I want to be the man who's who's passing on his faith to his children, not just in words, not just dragging them to church on Sunday, but like every day, throughout the day, in multiple ways, they're picking up on how I'm actually living the things out that I'm preaching to them, or teaching to them, or professing that I believe. In other words, Justin Bailey talks about in his code of character that and I might not be saying exactly like he says it, but it's this concept that your actions align with your beliefs. And I really see, um, if a man's actions are lining up with his beliefs or what he says he believes, he's then living a life of character and integrity. And so that's kind of my thinking behind all of this. And then those are the three main areas in my life: my relationship with God, so as a man; my relationship with my wife, so as a husband; and my relationship with my children, so as a father. And then everything else kind of follows suit in my mind under that. So me as a worker, as a friend, um, as a business owner, as any other type of relationship or hat that you could put on my head is all underneath those three categories. And it was intentional how I went through those categories, as well as a man, as a husband, as a father, because I think there is a hierarchical um, flow to those. God has to come first. Your wife has to come before your children, and then your children have to come before everything else. And if you have it's like just getting your priorities right. And if you have your priorities right, then life is going to work a little bit more smoothly, or things are going to go the way that they should. That's not to say, don't hear me wrong, I'm not saying that you're never going to encounter hardship, you're never going to struggle, you're never going to have tragedy. I'm not saying you're going to be financially and materially blessed in every way possible, and those types of things. But you are, when you have things set up like that, you're living your life with integrity, and you're living your life with character, and you're living your life with respect to God's standard. So,
Yeah.
Long answer for you, man, but you asked.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome stuff. I love the part that I particularly love is you keep bringing up servant leadership. We talk about it a lot in the military, and I believe it's definitely applicable to areas well beyond the confines of the military. And and I think that if we can approach things with an air of service to one another, this world would be a whole lot better place. There's the whole entitlement mindset out there, but how did you arrive at this, I guess this attitude of servant leadership? Where did you first pick up on that?
Well, let me say something first that you made me think of, and then I'll tell you where
Sure.
servant leadership thing came from. One aspect to servant leadership, and this is something I'm learning, by the way. It's not most of the things I'm going to share, I'm not sharing with you as someone who has completely arrived and is 100% hitting it all the time. These are things I'm learning and growing in and experiencing. So I don't want to give the impression that that I have this all nailed down either. But one thing that I'm learning, take marriage for example. When you marry your wife, you create a covenant, not a contract, with her. And the marriage vows: in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do us part. And whatever else you might throw in there, the traditional marriage vows. And a lot of times we mistakenly think that if I do my part, then she's going to do her part. And my question would be, what if she never did her part? Are you still going to honor that covenant? Now, in most cases, it never works out completely like that. But lots of times we get this idea in our head that if I just do my part, then she's going to do her part and things are going to fall into place. But what I'm saying is, like, that's the wrong way to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
You should do your part regardless of whether or not she does her part. You should do your part as a father regardless of how your children respond to it, or whether they're respectful to you 100% of the time or obey you 100% of the time. And to answer your question about the servant leadership mindset idea, it comes from Jesus and from God. And if you think about it, um, Jesus came down to earth to live as a man, to die on the cross for the sins of mankind, for people who disobeyed God. Like he was standing in place, sacrificing himself on the cross for the sins of the entire world. Now, these people that he's dying for, which is everybody, by the way, the sins that he's dying for, the sacrifice that he's paying for the sins of the people that sinned against God. So it just blows my mind sometimes that even though we disown God and disobey him and reject him on a regular basis when we don't live a perfect life, and you can't live a perfect life. And so you're kind of like in this stuck place. Like, I can't do right 100% of the time. But yet I'm kind of expected to in one sense. And that's the predicament that we find ourselves in as human beings, is that we know the right thing to do and we don't do it. Or, yeah, we know the right thing to do and we don't do it. Or we do the wrong thing when we know the right thing that we should do. So it puts us in this kind of pickle, this predicament, this place where we need the forgiveness of God. But God, on the other hand, is a holy, righteous, and just God, and He can't tolerate sin. And we've sinned against Him. We've disowned Him. We've rejected Him. We've basically said, God, the way you want us to do things is not the way I want to do them, so I'm going to do what I want. It's just kind of like when you have your rules and your standards in your home, and your kids do something contrary to those. Same thing with our relationship with God, and yet He sent Christ to die on the cross for our sins in our place. And so, in that way, Christ served us. And so he is a servant leader because, Christ is God. Jesus is God. And so he's humbling himself in one way to come down from, basically coming down from heaven to live on earth as a man, taking on flesh, taking on human nature, living his life in subjection to the commands of God. So he's living his life righteously. He didn't do anything wrong. He didn't deserve to die on the cross. He is completely innocent. And yet, he took responsibility for God's creation, mankind, in dying on the cross for their sins, so that their sins could be forgiven, so that God's people could be brought back into a right relationship with God. Because, like I said, God cannot be in the presence of sin. Those sins need to be paid for. And that's what Christ did on the cross, is he paid for the sins of mankind. And I think that is the ultimate display of servant leadership, is Christ took responsibility for the situation that he didn't even create in the first place. You know what I mean? Like, he created us, but he didn't make us sin, is what I'm saying.
Right.
It's kind of like if your kid is playing baseball and breaks the neighbor's window, and then you pay for it. you you birthed the child, or your wife did, but then you pay the penalty for the window. Is kind of what I'm getting at. There's a very loose analogy there.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I don't mean to cut you off, but like
no, it's fine.
I love how you're framing this up, because a lot of times we turn our cheek the other way and run from responsibility pretty
Hmm.
frequently, and I see it happening a lot of times. But what you're describing is simply just is you see a situation and you see that it needs to be handled, and you just handle it, whether or not
Right.
it's your responsibility, or whether or not it's your right, whether you're right or she's wrong, or whatever the case may be. If we see something wrong or see something that needs to be handled, we just need to handle our business and just set the example, and pick up the ball and start running with it.
Exactly, and I think that's a mindset, um, the opposing mindset that we have to constantly fight in our culture, where nobody wants to take responsibility. Um, Nobody wants to handle the blame, and everybody wants to point fingers at everybody else and say, "Well, it's not." This happens a lot in my home. There will be a book or a toy sitting on the floor, and we'll try to figure out whose it is. And nobody wants to fess up to it. It might be one child's toy, but the other kid got it out. And then the third kid was the last one to play with it. And so they're all like, well, it's not, I didn't get it out. Well, I didn't play with it last. Well, it's not mine,
Yeah,
and nobody wants to take responsibility for it. And it's like, then dad comes through the room and he just quietly, humbly doesn't say anything, picks up the toy and puts it away. Um, that's kind of servant leadership.
yeah. So speaking of your kids, how are you? How are you, like, in a practical sense? How are you using that as a lesson for your kids? Are you just setting the example, or are you employing any other tactics and strategies there?
One of the things, a couple like down to earth, tangible things that I do with my kids, and again, I try to be consistent, um, with doing these things, and I'm not 100% there, is I try to be intentional about investing time with my children. Um, this concept of giving up my agenda for what they want is very, very, very difficult. In Kenyon, you know all about this. You
Yeah,
work full time, you have, um, a side hustle going on, and then you have other duties and responsibilities. And sometimes you just want to do what you want to do.
yeah,
And then it's easy to let your family fall by the wayside, because it's like they're just always there. Like, tomorrow I can do it, tomorrow, and tomorrow never comes. And because it's always tomorrow.
yeah,
And so you could turn around, and 10 years pass you by and you're like, whoa, how did that happen? um and so I've set some things in place, some routines with my children, and they help me they help hold me accountable to doing it. One of the things that I strive to do is, I have 5 children, like I said before, and so one day each day of the week we have what's called daddy time, and it's 20 or 30 minutes where it's just me and them engaged in doing something. Like yesterday was my daughter Lydia's day, and I asked her what she wanted to do. We got a snack, we played checkers, and then we made dinner together. Just simple stuff like that. But I will tell you what, they will hold you, they will hold your feet to the fire for that time. They really will, really will. Once in a while, usually at least once a week, I'll have a podcast interview lined up right after work when I get home, so I can just get it out of the way and then have the rest of the evening. And if I don't let them know in advance, they get upset if I come home and they're like, "Are we going to do daddy time?" I'm like, "What? I have a podcast interview. We'll do it right after." And they're like, "Oh man," they like get upset. So I have to
yeah,
make sure that that's telling me, when I reflect and think about that, like, oh, I need to make sure that I'm communicating with them that, okay, on Tuesday I have a podcast interview, so we'll still do our daddy time. We just have to push it back till 4:30, quarter to 5, whatever. Um,
yeah,
Another thing that we do is, And I don't really remember how we got into doing this. I think we started doing it with my older son, and maybe he just asked to do it, or maybe we did it as a privilege because he was older. But we do this thing called stay up late. And Monday night we let the boys stay up late and put the girls down to bed. We let the boys stay up late. And again, it's just 20 or 30 minutes. It's not like we're staying up till midnight with them. And
Right.
again, we might just have a snack, play a game. Sometimes we just talk. And those types of things. But they love it. Tuesday night we do it with the girls, and they love it as well. One other thing that we do is on Wednesday nights we let one of the kids sleep in our room. They usually will like snuggle in bed for a little bit, and then they'll go to sleep on the floor in our bedroom. And again, they love it. When it's Wednesday night, they know it's their night. They're like, "Oh, can I get my bed set up in your bedroom?" Um, and I don't know how that sounds to you, Kenyon, but I mean, it really does it for them. And it's just one night a week, um, and that's one little way that my wife and I can kind of give up our agenda for them.
Yeah, I love those types of things, and it's easy for us to fall into the traps of our own routines. But if
Yeah,
we have these routines that disrupt our normal routines, that get us up out of those little comfort zones that we tend to find ourselves in. Because one of the things I found was that I fell into this almost like hypnotic rhythm of my routine, and sometimes you gotta do something to snap out of those things. And letting our daughter sleep in our room occasionally is something we do. And I think
yeah,
those things are, it's almost like a slumber party. Those
yeah,
things are, I remember those types of events in my childhood pretty fondly, and we're creating those types of memories for our daughter, and you're doing it for the same thing for your kids. And I think those are gonna, that's gonna enrich in their lives down the road.
yeah. And one of the things that I learned a long time ago is that there's this false idea of creating quality time with your children. And let me briefly explain what I mean by that. You can try to set up this great event time experience with your child thinking it'll be quality time. And the catch is what you think might be quality time for your kids might not be quality time for them. And what you think is not quality time for them, they might interpret as quality time.
Yeah.
Point is, you never really actually know what your kids are receiving as quality time. And
Mm-hmm.
so your best bet at getting as much quality time as possible with them is getting as much quantity of time with them. And you were talking about your routines, and I think lots of times men that are driven to accomplish and produce and do things, we set up routines. We have our morning routine, we have our daytime routine, we have our routine at the end of day, and those things are important and extremely valuable. But I would add that it's very important that within those routines we embed routines and practices and traditions with our children and with our spouses, um, and even with some of our relationships. One of the other things I'm really big on is the importance of men locking shields with one another, having a band of brothers that you can kind of do life with. That's one of the reasons I developed the Ironman Mastermind, and I'm sure that's why you have your mastermind as well,
Yeah.
is to lock arms and lock shields with another guy, or other men, to move forward in life. Um, so the whole point of me saying all that was you talk about this hypnotic rhythm that you can get into, and it's very easy to make that all about you,
Yeah.
and you need to include your close relationships in that. Be careful about that.
Yep, that's definitely a trap I fell into, and sometimes even fall into present. Like you said, I'm certainly not perfect at all the things that I talk about on my podcast either. But these things, that's why it's important to, like you said, surround yourself with like-minded men who are doing the same thing and go in the same places as you are, so they can call you out on that type of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to back up to something you mentioned a little while ago, and that's, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's like the gap between knowing what you should do and what you actually do. How I would imagine your mastermind helps out with this, but what are some other ways that you are employing to help close the gap between what you know you ought to do and what you actually do?
Two things come to mind really quick, and they're basically two manifestations of the same thing. Um, One is journaling. So every morning I sit down and I journal about the previous day, and I'm pretty much, for the most part, just writing down what happened the previous day, maybe like 5 to 7 sentences. It takes maybe 10 minutes. And I started doing that a little over a year ago, and now I'm to the point. So what I do is I take a page for each day of the year. So I have like literally 365 pages in a 3-ring notebook. Um, and so in the morning, I take the page out for today, and well, it's actually for yesterday. So in the morning, I wrote about um, yesterday, what happened yesterday. Well, now I'm at the point where when I'm writing about yesterday, I'm writing underneath what I wrote about that same day a year prior.
Mm.
So now I can look back and see, where was I a year ago? What kind of activities was I doing? In It's in that vein of reflection. I think a lot of times we go through life day to day, and it's like you talk about that hypnotic rhythm. You can just go days and days and days and days just plowing forward and never looking back and reflecting on what you did, what you accomplished, what went right, why it went right, what went wrong, why it went wrong, and what are you going to do the same next time, or what are you going to do differently next time.
Yeah.
And I really learned this I did some parent coaching with a guy by the name of Dr. Scott Turansky. Actually, my wife and I just finished up an 8-week coaching program with him for being parents. And one of the things that he has us do with our children is, whenever they begin to get disrespectful or disobedient, or get into like a tantrum, or beginning with an episode or something like that, you develop this routine with them where you send them to a break. You say, you need to go take a break, change your heart, settle down, and report back to me when you're ready. And so they have to go sit on the basement steps. And it's not a timeout where it's like you need to go sit for 5 minutes, because that's just basically training them to do time.
Yeah.
They're on a mission when they're in a break, and the mission is to change their heart, and to calm down, settle down, and begin to think rationally again. And that's really working on their heart. And why I'm bringing this up is because when they report back, there's 3 questions that you're always supposed to ask them. One is, what did you do wrong? And that's getting them to confess what they did wrong. Number 2, why was it wrong? And usually it falls in the category of, it either wasn't kind, it was disrespectful, or they disobeyed. It's usually one of those 3 things.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third question is, what are you going to do differently next time? And while that applies to my kids, I can apply that same type of 3-question principle in my own life when I reflect back. And it doesn't have to just be in a situation where I messed up. It can be at the end of the day. It can be at the end of this podcast interview. I know Ryan Mickler talks about this five-step action review. It's similar to that type of thing. You can ask yourself, what didn't go right, or what went right? Why did it go wrong, or why did it go right? And then third question, you can ask, what am I going to tweak for next time, or what am I going to keep for next time? Just so you can begin to develop in your mind, and even if you write it down, this log of a learning experience. Like, turn every experience, every major experience, every win and every loss into a learning experience to help propel you forward.
Nice. I like that. Do you have kind of a 5-year type journal? Is that kind of what the model that you're following?
There's no limit on the number of years. I mean, I haven't really thought that far ahead about it, but my intention is to just continue just journaling every 10 minutes every morning. And then just, each page, just keep adding. Next year, I'll add more onto March 8th. And the year after that, I'll add more onto March 8th. And then like next year, when I get to this point in the year, I can look back and see what did I do last year and then the year before. And so I begin to have this log of the progression of my life from year to year on that day. And,
Nice.
you know, it was kind of funny because the other day I was reading through it, and I had last year on that day, I had said something, like made an off comment to my wife, and it really upset her, and it kind of ruined the day. And it was funny because this year around that same day, we had like a heart to heart conversation. And then at the end, I said some things and it kind of went downhill from there. And it was like, same battles, man.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
And you sometimes forget about those things, and I really like that model. I think that's a little tidbit I'm gonna take away from our conversation. I might come up with my own system there. I like that. But yeah, like I was saying, you tend to forget some of these things, and it's a nice reminder to, what did I learn from this situation? Even, a year later, we tend to, we might remember the episode happening, but we don't remember those lessons necessarily.
yeah, yeah. And that 3-question process that I was talking about, you can do that. That's like a mental exercise that you can do. Or you can make things in your life a cue for doing those. For example, like I know maybe in my head, I have the cue that when I finish a podcast, I need to sit for 2 minutes and just think what went well, what didn't go well, why did it go well, why didn't it go well, and then what am I going to tweak for next time or keep for next time, that, what contributed to it going well, or what contributed to it not going well.
Right on, man. Well, hey, I hate to cut us off here, but we are starting to bump up on time here.
Yeah,
But
no problem, man.
but let's let people know how they can get in touch with you if they want to join the mastermind or simply follow the podcast. How can they do all that?
Sure. Well, everything is at dadhackers.us. Dadhackers.us is the website there. There's a link for the podcast. There's a link for checking out information about the Ironman Mastermind group. There's a link there to join our free private Facebook community. And then I have a couple downloads on there. There's a download for 28 prayers for your kids. And then there's also a 5-day email challenge to help you become a better dad on there as well.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks again for dropping by here, and it's been an epic conversation. Do you have any last minute words of wisdom that maybe you want to share with us that we didn't get to talk about here?
Yeah, sure, Kenyon. And I would just say keep going in life. One of the things that is so unfortunate is when men start something and don't finish it. And I understand there's times where, you've tried something out and it's not working and you just need to move on to the next thing. But there are some things in life that you should never give up on. Like, don't give up on pursuing God. Don't give up on pursuing relationships with other men, like we've talked about with locking shields with other men. Don't give up on pursuing your wife, and don't give up on pursuing your children. You're gonna have hard days. Disappointments are gonna happen. You're in a world with people that are not perfect, and neither are you. And you wouldn't want to live in a perfect world because you'd be the one to mess it up. And so just keep that in mind. And one other thing is that I try to remind myself of this. If my wife and I have a disagreement, is that we are actually on the same team. And there's a force out there trying to separate marriages, trying to separate families. And one of the subtle, sneaky ways that that's done is by getting these little disagreements to be blown out of proportion, and to create bitterness and resentment and anger and separation between you and your wife and you and your family. And if you remember that you're on the same team, you can come at that situation from a different perspective, perhaps a more humble perspective.
Yeah, our egos tend to get in the way, and we want to be the ones that are quote unquote right. But
Right on.
I talked about this a couple days ago, in that we tend to live in a world of absolutes where we either have to be right or wrong, black and white, good or bad, and none of that's actually true because we're the ones that place those meanings on things. And if we can drop many of those meanings and just simply be with the situation, I can't agree with you more. I think you know what I'm trying to get at here. If we can drop these the ego and just simply handle the situation like we talked about earlier, just do the right thing, and no one has to be right, no one has to be wrong. It just has to be done.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a hard thing to do, but you're very true. Very right. Yep.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks again. We'll end things here. Maybe we'll have to do a part 2 down the road because you've been dropping some serious knowledge, some serious game on us, and appreciate everything, man.
Yeah, definitely, Kenyon. I'd love to do that. And thank you so much for having me on the show. It's been an honor and a blessing. And just want to say thank you, man. Appreciate it.
No worries, man. Thanks again.
Sure thing. All right, gentlemen, that's all we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope our conversation was a blessing to you and that you leave this episode better equipped to be the man that God has called and created you to be. Now, I want you to head on over to the show notes at dadhackers.us/074. There you can connect more with Kenyon and what he's doing with the Zero Excuses podcast, as well as get more details about the Ironman Mastermind and what we have going on over at Patreon. Well, fellas, until next week, remember Proverbs 27:17. As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. Stay sharp.